Hello and welcome to the Bridging Borders Project. I'm Hannah Hundle, and alongside my co-host, Saira Jagopal, we have an interview today with Prime Minister Ralph Gonsalves of St. Vincent and the Grenadines.
So Prime Minister, thank you for joining us today. As of August 15th, it was reported that 55 of the 57 individuals who tested positive for COVID-19 in your country had regained health. Can you provide updates about the coronavirus situation in the intervening span of time? What is the severity of the situation now? And how do you plan to keep the death toll at zero?
Well, the number up to last evening is 61. There would have been 3-4 persons added since you saw the numbers on August 15th. Nobody is hospitalized, nobody is sick, nobody has died, no frontline person, doctor, nurse, police officer, none of that. Basically, of all the cases, only 4 are Vincentians who are at home, and they got the virus from somebody who had come from overseas. So that was a local transmission. Everybody else is directly import related. We have not had community transmission. And we're keeping the deaths at zero with basically contact tracing, old-fashioned boots on the ground epidemiology, good testing arrangements, reportage, education. That's the way we deal with this, which is the way in which we deal with all pandemics. And we have support systems beyond if anybody gets sick, like we have an isolation center, we amend the laws, the Public Health Act to face with this particular pandemic. And but we haven't done any state of emergency, we haven't done any curfew, we haven't done any lockdown. We had restrictions, but we fashioned approaches which are appropriate to our circumstance.
So back in April, the St. Vincent and the Grenadines Ministry of Health had confirmed that contact tracing efforts were underway due to the uptick in COVID-19 cases. Can you tell us more about that contact tracing effort? How long did it continue on for, and what did you find out in the process?
Well, we're doing contact tracing all the time. I mean, the second case we had, which came in from the United States of America, that's on March the 25th. That person was a little irresponsible, and we contact traced 164 persons within a 36-hour time frame, which I would say is pretty good work. We have a good community structure, and we have good leadership also in the public health sector, chief medical officer of health, and so on and so forth. The problem which we had with the uptick in April is with a lot of sailors coming back, persons from the cruise ships, the seafarers. Mm-hmm. Some of them broke the quarantine.
Okay.
And because of that, we had to ramp up our contact tracing. Fortunately, none of those had no one with whom they came into contact got the virus, because these were persons who didn't test positive by the rapid test when they arrived at first. And then we are doing the PCR test. So between those 2 tests, we have to keep you quarantined. And some persons broke the quarantine. There was a little discipline, but we did that quite well. Nowadays, what we do, everybody who comes to the country must have a PCR test because they're now easily available. And when you arrive, we take a PCR test from you so that we screen you as you come in, and we have strengthened our testing capacity, and we are strengthening it further.
Okay. So I know you said there's no local transmission, seriously, but how have the local hospitals faced in terms of access to personal protective equipment and ventilators? Are you experiencing any shortages in medical equipment? And what are you doing about the mask policy in your country today?
PCR consumables, the usables. We had problems because in the early days, the supply chain was disrupted, and at least one developed country was creating problems for some others. That country shall remain nameless, but there's enough reportage done on that. But that's water under the bridge, so to speak. But we have over the early couple of weeks and following, we have been able to purchase our supplies, and of course, regional, international entities to which we belong have provided additional supplies. So we are pretty okay with supplies at the moment. In fact, what we are doing, we have begun a process because I want to know the epidemiological profile of the entire country.
Mm-hmm.
We are testing. We are doing rapid tests for important sections of the population. The teachers, the police, the prisoners, the prison officers, fisher folk who travel between the islands, and so on and so forth. So that in addition to the existing PCR tests, which we do on an ongoing basis, which I've just indicated, we want to do thousands. And then when you're talking about, remember, we have a population of 110,000 people here. I want to know the epidemiological profile of the bulk of this population.
Incredible.
So in that way, we can better address this particular pandemic. And we have control systems coming in, not lockdown, but control systems, restrictions. For instance, if you're coming in from the United States, which is a high-risk country, you must have a PCR test done at least 5 days before you arrive. And a test will be done on you here on arrival. You'll go into a quarantine at a hotel, an approved hotel or guest house at your expense. And on day 4 or day 5, we test you again. And at that point, if you're also negative at all these stages, you can then go home, or if you're a national, coming back home. Or if you're not a national, well, you stay in the hotel, or if you go to somebody else's home, you stay there until 14 days have elapsed. Or in some cases, if you come from a high-risk group, from a high-risk country, we may put you under a few more days quarantine as the epidemiological profile warrants and upon the advice of the public health functionaries. In relation to masks, we are encouraging masks to be worn. And in relation to the school children, we are highly recommended the use of the mask. In fact, all children are back at school today.
Okay.
Early childhood education, primary schools, secondary schools, and and what we do, we treat the home as a bubble. We treat the school as a bubble. Between those two bubbles, you wear masks. So you come out of your home with a mask, you go on the public transportation system or your own transport system with a mask on. You go into the school. As you enter the school compound, you do a temperature check, you have on the mask, you go to your classroom, you take off your mask.
Okay.
Teachers and students. And we provide, the government provides masks for all the teachers, all the functionaries in the school, all the students. I visited 2 schools in the city this morning, 2 big schools, primary schools. And I had my mask. So to my security officers, it's not mandatory, but highly recommended. And we are using suasion. I'm on the radio every minute, practically. I'm talking to people all the time, and we have a good program of public education. And we are doing it our way, and it has been effective. I'm not saying that our way is the only way or the best way in an absolute sense, but our way is the most appropriate and the best for us. And we ramp up where we need to ramp up, as the case may be. And we are not interested in criminalizing activity, which would be very normal. I mean, it's not a usual thing for you to wear a mask. And why should I have to be giving warnings to 12-year-olds and get the police involved or any other kind of agency? That's a matter for public persuasion, for the parents, and we have good parent teachers associations, the teachers, everybody. We are together on it. And we and as Prime Minister and the Minister of Health also would go on the radio and speak. And I'm very often saying, remember, it's highly recommended, kids, you wear your mask. And I visited many of the forms this morning, the classes, and talked to the kids. In fact, I had about, this morning already, about 3 hours of it with the children. I myself went. They love it.
Yeah. I wanted to switch directions a little bit to talk about travel and relationships.
Travel
and relationships with the United States. So
yes.
The United States released new travel guidelines that strongly discourage U.S. citizens from visiting CARICOM nations amidst the pandemic. You issued a rebuke of this decision, calling it light comedy central. Why do you feel this is an ill-informed decision on part of the U.S. government? And how do you see this move affecting future diplomatic relations between the United States and your country?
Oh, our relations with the United States are excellent. We have our differences on this, on that, or that issue. At the moment, you probably may or may not be aware, we are a non-permanent member of the United Nations Security Council. We are the smallest country ever to have that particular honor and distinction. We were elected in June last year at the General Assembly by an overwhelming majority. And so it's a 2-year term. We're finishing our first term this year, and we go from January next year for a second term to the 31st of December next year. So as you know, the Security Council deals with lots of issues of war and peace all over the world, security, and we have our differences. We talk about them, but we are friends. And I have a tradition. I've been Prime Minister now 19 and a half, almost 20 years. We don't have term limits. I became Prime Minister in March 2001. And the United States of governments of all stripes know that the Prime Minister of St. Vincent and Grenadines, I speak my mind. I talk to my friends very openly, and I have no enemies. We are friends of all, and we strive for a better world. And from our actions, people see that we're not satellites of anybody. Just on Friday, the U.S. ambassador called me to speak to me about some matters. We are very amicable. Last week, the Undersecretary of State dealing with matters in the Middle East called me about this or that. So we continue to have good and normal relations. But I had to call it what it was. I mean, the United States had gone past 6 million, and the deaths 200,000 thereabouts, a little more than that. And they move rapidly. I mean, to move from their third to their fourth million took, for instance, 16 days. Well, come on. Are you're going to tell me that you're advising Americans not to come to St. Vincent and the Grenadines when you have 6 million people infected and so many deaths, and we see all the problems. When I have no deaths, I don't have anybody who has been sick, who hasn't gone to the hospital, no frontline persons, nobody on a ventilator, nothing at all. No community transmission ever since this pandemic started. We had only 4 persons within a small area with a local transmission from an imported case, and that is way up in the early stages. You're going to tell people in your epidemiological condition not to come to St. Vincent and the Grenadines to be fearful of the virus? Well, somebody must be, they read in a different set of epidemiological data than me, so that it was hilarious. So I had to say so.
Yeah.
Because when a big power issues these kinds of lists, people are inclined to take them seriously. But if that's what you're doing, I don't know what metrics you're using. In the case of the United Kingdom, on one occasion, when they did that, I asked them to read when they tell me they're using this or that metric, I asked them please to read a book published in the early 1950s by Thomas Kuhn, K-U-H-N, The Structure of Scientific Revolutions, to understand these kinds of things and measurements and the like, and to see how you can make them in a value-free, these judgments in a value-free manner. But that's what it is. So they do that, I respond. But it doesn't affect our friendship.
So in our interviews with other leaders of CARICOM countries, we've learned that the decrease in tourism due to the pandemic has generated much concern, primarily because of tourism's vitality to the economies of many Caribbean countries. How would you characterize your country's capacity to rebound from this crisis economically, and how will you support the citizens who've lost their jobs during this pandemic?
Yes, well, it's a big problem. I mean, the serious economic fallout from the very early days of this pandemic. On March the 25th, I gave my first big address to the nation on this issue. And very early, I identified the enormity of the challenge and 4 interconnected elements: health, economic, social, which includes education, and security. I wasn't in the business of getting into a panic about the health and lose my focus on the other dimensions, the interlocking dimensions of this particular challenge. So this is why I was not underestimating the problem, the challenge, but I wasn't getting hysterical about it. I was being sober, calm, balanced, approaching in a fact-based manner, science, the law, right reason, against the bedrock of principles of good governance. And that is how we have proceeded. Now, because St. Vincent and the Grenadines doesn't have, as part of our gross domestic product, as high a tourism content as, for instance, Barbados or Antigua or St. Kitts or Jamaica, the fall off in our GDP has not been as significant, because some countries have fallen their GDP by 20%. In our case, it's about under 5%, which within the terms of what you're having is fairly reasonable. And insofar as government revenues are concerned, some countries, their revenues have fallen, the government revenues, by as much as 50%.
Mm-hmm.
In my case, over the first 7 months of the year, it has remained basically stable, slightly down. So we have been fortunate in the way in which our economy is structured, but very much so because I didn't lock down. Other people stopped coming to St. Vincent, planes stopped flying, I didn't stop them. And as soon as they wanted to start back, every week I have flights from Canada, with Air Canada. Every week I have flights coming out of Miami by American Airlines. And we have regional airlines that come to us, but we have very good control mechanisms, very, very strong enforcement. So I don't have to go the whole hog, so to speak. I can make a very good balance between lives and livelihoods. But if at all anything was to get out of hand, I know how to ramp up. And that's why we are strengthening the epidemiological investigation and getting a more complete profile, factually, of the population. Our situation has not been studied like how in some other countries. But it's a remarkable way we have done it.
Okay.
I can't criminalize an activity of a farmer going in the morning and going in the late afternoon, early evening to see about his animals on his lands, or to stop a fisherman, getting him at 4 o'clock in the morning to throw the seine in a bay, which he does all the time to catch fish for himself and his neighbors and to sell to the market. I mean, I have restrictions. For instance, I prevented gatherings of people by banning music in public places, amplified music, or at private places where the public have access. You do that, you cut out a lot of the parties, because people want, in our countries, in the Caribbean, to dance and have a lot of fun.
Yeah.
But if I put restrictions on the music, and then gradually I lift restrictions as the circumstances warrant or admit. And insofar as helping people, we have put in place a lot of protective measures and economic stimuli amounting to about 4.5%, by the end of 5% of GDP, which is a big social net protection. The problem is this, and stimulus, but the problem is this, is how long you can do it for without unbalancing the fiscal side of things. So you're walking a tightrope and you have to be making adjustments all the time.
So it's a tightrope to walk indeed. Now, I wanted to ask you, how are you working with the other CARICOM nations to joint manage this pandemic response? How are you increasing travel restrictions together? How are you working in terms of the economic integration, especially because you are the chairman of CARICOM now?
Yes, well, we first of all, the Caribbean Public Health Agency, CARPHA, has done immense work with us to help to coordinate responses. And in the early days, to help us with PCR testing, and now helping us nevertheless to do verification systems. Then we have the regional security system. To move samples about, to move equipment about. Like, for instance, Amerijet was to bring the masks in a week, a lot of masks. We produced some here, but we had a lot of masks coming out of the Dominican Republic to give teachers and students. I wanted each to get 2 or 3 washable ones. They will provide for themselves too, but I consider that part of our obligation. For its own reasons, Amerijet didn't come on Wednesday. Amerijet didn't come on Thursday, but he was going to Trinidad on Friday of the US. The regional security system has 2 C-26 aircraft. So I had the aircraft go pick up the mass in Trinidad, which is an hour away, and bring them here, since America couldn't come. So there are many practical ways in which we cooperate, and we have meetings frequently, the leaderships on Zoom, in this room where the equipment is set up for Zoom. I spend a lot of time here with meetings, regional meetings of one kind or another, and we try as far as practical to coordinate all our positions, and we have been doing a pretty good job at it, I think.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for your time, Prime Minister.